Well, hello, guys. Good morning. I just want to take just a moment to welcome all of you here, and if we could do the same to all those watching online. Can we welcome them? Appreciate you tuning in. And hey, I'm David. I'm one of the pastors here, and today we're finishing up our Real Bad Habits series. And wow, have we got a hot topic for you today. Oh. Matt Watkins, everybody. It's the hot topic of lust. Yeah. So if you didn't see the social media post earlier this week, if you didn't see the sign coming in, if you didn't know you walked into a PG-13 message, you did. Okay? So just take a moment it's going to take a little bit of time before I get to that. So if you need to slip out, that's fine. But I just want to let you know it's PG-13. And so today we're going to hear directly from Jesus for what he has to say about the topic. And we're also going to hear from Paul, who was a man who used to persecute the church and have people jailed for their faith, but then had a radical transformation in his life when he had an encounter with Jesus. And I got to tell you, a radical encounter and transformation with Jesus is what is needed in our life, because without that, we're going to be staying in our old bad habits, regardless of what those habits are. And Paul experienced that firsthand, which gives him credibility for us to read him today and his thoughts. But listen, all joking aside, I've walked into this message with a lot of reverence. I've been praying about this a long time, for weeks now. Prepping for this, because anytime you talk about anything related to sexuality, it starts to hit some spots in our lives that can be awkward, maybe some things we don't like to talk about, things that we try to bury, maybe current issues, things that we're struggling with, and so it can always get a little bit awkward. And today is not going to be much different, because we're going to be talking about lust and talking about its impact on our lives. And so a lot of what I might say might be difficult to hear, but I hope that you will listen. And listen, too, there's a lot that I could say about this topic. So out in the lobby after this message, if you come and talk to me, yeah, believe me, I know. I thought about it, like talking about this and talking about that. There's so many things that we could cover in the next few minutes, but we're going to stick to lust itself. But listen, my prayer is that whatever God's wanting to do with this, that he'll speak to all of us. And usually I'll pray at the end of a message, but can we just take a moment and pray now? I just feel like that's appropriate. Will you pray with me? Jesus, thank you so much that you've given us your word, instructions of how to live this life. And there are moments that you speak to very delicate issues, and this is one of those where your word speaks loudly. And so, God, I pray that you would speak. God, speak today. Speak through your word. And Lord, may you speak to our hearts about this very delicate topic. It's in your name we pray, God. Amen. Thank you, guys. So, hey, as I start out, I want to share like a quick story that a conversation I had with my dad, which was really interesting. Now, my dad, let's just say, is not an evangelical. So his faith journey very different from mine, and so his theology very different. And one day we had a phone conversation, it was within the last year, and he said, "David, I just wanted to talk to you about something that just occurred to me." He's like, "I don't think you have ever sinned in your life." You know, like kids, you want to try to fool your parents, like you're just the best kid in the world. But I'm like, "Dad, that's not true at all." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, you've never done anything bad." And he lumped my grandfather, his dad, into that too. He's like, "You and my dad, like, you've never sinned." And I'm like, "Hey, Dad, I hate to burst your bubble on that, but yes, I totally have, because in fact, Jesus, he talked about this, where there are things that maybe the world would say is really, really bad that we can all agree on, something like murder. But Jesus said, listen, if you've had anger in your heart towards someone, you're guilty of murder. So what did Jesus do there? He internalized what usually comes out later. And he said the sin, the bad stuff begins there. So I'm like, Dad, I have been angry with people. So like, so I I appreciate what you're saying, Dad, but it's totally not true. Like, I'm as much a sinner as anybody else. But sometimes we begin to kind of think that way, where it's like, it's really more about the action and not about the thought. But here's the question. Does sin begin with what we do, or does it start with what we think? Because, you've probably heard this before, just follow your heart. Right? You ever heard that? Maybe you've given that advice, or maybe you've quoted it on social media, because it sounds so right. Just follow your heart. And at the surface level, it makes a lot of sense until you read Jeremiah 17:9, which says, the human heart is most deceitful and terribly wicked, desperately wicked. So if we listen to our hearts, it's going to get us into trouble. All right? Jesus understood this to be true. And so let's go to the book of Matthew here this morning. We'll start there. Let's listen to the words of Jesus. He says, you have heard that the law of Moses says, do not commit adultery. But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust in his eyes has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So if your eye, even if it is your good eye, causes you to lust, gouge it out and throw it away, because it is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your hand, even your stronger hand, causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. Now, before anyone goes chopping off any body parts today, Jesus is teaching here and using this teaching method to show how serious sin is. How serious it is. And we live in a culture and society where sin's like, But Jesus is taking a moment to say that it is serious, and we need to take it seriously. Now, this teaching comes from the Sermon on the Mount, and in this sermon are some of the most influential words ever spoken. And even if you didn't grow up in church, I guarantee there's phrases from this that you have heard, that you're aware of. Things like love your enemies or go the extra mile. And at first, when you listen to this, you might think that Jesus' teachings are kind of weird. They're kind of like upside down or backwards. And that's because at its surface level, that's the way it sounds. But what Jesus is doing is he's teaching a counter-cultural teaching. He's teaching something that's counterintuitive. Because these things that he's teaching goes against the values in which the world we live. So when he says the first will be last, and the last will be first, and if you want to find life, you must lose your life. Don't hate your enemy, love your enemy. That's Jesus being counterintuitive. But he does this also with sexuality. And it's kind of funny because he goes from blessed are the poor in spirit in one moment to let's talk about sex. And so Jesus, I love that too. Can I just say that? I love that God's word speaks to these kind of issues because we need to hear from him on that. So he speaks about a counterintuitive purity. Let's reread verse 27. He says, you have heard that the law of Moses says, do not commit adultery. So, of course, this is one of the 10 commandments, that you should not commit adultery, which means if you're married, you may not have sexual intimacy with anyone other than your spouse. We all understand, right? That's bad. It's bad. It's betrayal, it's deceit, it's unfaithfulness. And guys, it is always wrong. And it always violates God's will. And can I just take a moment here to say, there's other forms of intimacy besides physical intimacy that can lead to other things. If you're more emotionally intimate with someone beside your spouse, or even spiritually intimate, that can lead to dangerous places. It can lead to dangerous places. So Jesus was saying, listen, you've heard this said, right? But Jesus recognizes that sin isn't just what we do. It's not just the outward actions. Sin starts in the heart because it's a heart issue. And here Jesus was dealing with religious people who literally thought, hey, since I haven't committed the act of adultery, I'm more righteous than you. And Jesus was saying, listen, you're completely missing your own sin and brokenness. I remember a long time ago, I worked on staff at a Baptist church in New Orleans, Louisiana. That's a city to do ministry in, can I just tell you? And around that time, there was a big hullabaloo about a denomination that was boycotting Disney because of gay days. So there was a TV crew that came to the church I was at, and it was of the same denomination, and they wanted to kind of interview us. And so I was kind of thrown into that. I don't know how, but someone pulled me aside, Dave, can you talk to these guys? I'm like, okay. So I got a camera in my face, and I knew that the whole time this TV crew was trying to get some footage of this preacher, pastor type being, condemning, right? And so the whole time they were talking to me, I was just like, listen, this is the church. We're all sinners here. You're not going to find a perfect person here. And there's nothing that makes me or anyone here better than anyone else. And I was like, we believe that we're all in a sinking boat, and the only one who can save us, his name is Jesus. And so I just gave the gospel the whole time. And, of course, none of that was shown. I think when I was watching the news thing, and it was like, I'm waiting for it, all they showed was the back of the room, right? Just an image of the worship service, because they didn't get what and when the cameras were off, I was like, look, I know what you're looking for. You're not going to get it here. I'm sure if you go and find some other place, you're going to get what you're looking for, but you're not going to get it here, because we're going to teach truth. And that truth, guys, is this. There's not one of us in this room that's free of sin. Not one of us. And so Jesus is internalizing this and helping us realize that we are broken, that we are kind of a mess in our own, because it starts with how our mind and how our thoughts work. So let's dive a little deeper. He says, you have heard that the law of Moses says, do not commit adultery. But I say that anyone who even looks at a woman with lust in his eye has already committed adultery with her in his heart. You ever been at a restaurant and it's maybe a husband and a wife, or maybe it's a boyfriend and girlfriend, and they're sitting there enjoying the meal, and then this stunningly beautiful woman walks by, and the guy is just staring at her? Now, I know you've never done this before, but maybe you've heard about this, right? Maybe you've heard that this happens. And when he's looking at this person, he's doing a little bit more than looking. You know what I mean? And the linger, he's not seeing this person as like a daughter, or someone's wife, or someone's mother. He's looking at her as body parts. And when that happens, the wife notices and feels devalued and humiliated, right? It is pause here again to say, married men, there are a lot of beautiful women in the world, but only one is your wife. Keep your eyes on her.
I'm not sure I understand.
Oh my goodness. You all heard that, right? I promise that was not planned. That is absolutely amazing. Thank you, Apple. Oh my goodness, that is hilarious. So, here's the thing. The reason the wife feels that way is because Jesus' words are true. Because the guy, whether it be a husband or boyfriend, could say, hey, I was just looking, there's no harm. If it doesn't cause harm, why did the wife or girlfriend feel devalued or humiliated? It's because Jesus' words are true. That's where the sin begins. And so Jesus was dealing with this religious elite group called the Pharisees, and they were only worried about the act. But Jesus extends to the motive behind the act. And he says, look, if you look at a woman with lust, that's where the problem is. But can I just say, you're never going to stop noticing attractive people. Let's just put that out there. There's always going to be someone with a better body, a better smile, better groomed, dresses better. That's just always going to happen. And when are you going to stop noticing that? When you die, okay? So that's how we're hardwired for attraction and sexual desire. And those were, if we can just be honest, those were given to us by God. But here's the thing. The word Jesus uses here is not that you look and acknowledge that someone's attractive. It's, in the Greek, it's like this continued action. It's like basically like the description I had of the story. There was a staring, like mentally undressing this person. Not just a 1-second glance, but the 10-second, 30-second. And can I just say, a lot of the stuff, guys, we may feel really picked on, but this is true of women too, right? You don't get a pass. The same is true for all of us, right? So Jesus is talking about the relationship between the eyes and the heart. And so I would say this, it's your heart that's prone to wander, not your eyes. If we fix the heart problem, that will fix the eye problem. Our real issue is our heart. And I just want to take a moment to share a few things about this God-given appetite that God's given us. And the first thing is this. God created your appetites, but sin distorts them. God created it, but sin distorts it. Can we just all acknowledge that God created sex? Can we do that? Okay. And he is the one who created us to have desire. But there are some appetites that we have and desires that are good. Like we have a desire to work hard and provide for our family. And that is a good and healthy desire. But it can switch into something unhealthy when we work constantly and we're never there for our family. Do you see that? So it becomes something else. It becomes a distortion of a good appetite. The same is true of sex and intimacy. Like when it's taken out of the context of marriage, sex becomes a hookup. Or late night surfing online, looking at images or videos. That's when it becomes a sin. This God-giving desire and appetite transforms and steps into sin. And that's a hot potato, right? Porn. I don't know. For a lot of men in this room, that was probably a hot potato given to us by our dads. Because they had an addiction in this, whether you stumbled upon old magazines or whatever the case was. Even before you knew what the words were, you were suddenly addicted. And I will say this, I've heard this so many times with guys when they'll talk about pornography, they'll say, like, I don't know why I do it, but I just do it. And I think a big part of that is because they were introduced at it at such an early age that it was pre-verbal. Like, they don't even have words to describe what they experienced. And I think science has told us, like, seeing those first images can be like a hit of cocaine or heroin. It's that powerful to the body and the mind. But listen, I want to let you know, if that's something that you've wrestled with in your life, there are resources available for you. There's apps that you can have, like X-Blocks or Covenant Eyes, which come from a ministry called Triple X Church. It's a Christian organization to help people with porn addiction. And listen, this isn't just a guy thing anymore. It never was just a guy thing. But statistics are showing more and more now that pornography is available just by having a phone, that it's becoming more like 50-50 as far as people wrestling with a porn addiction. And can I tell you, there's other resources. If you're on Instagram, here's a case where I would say it's probably okay to lie. And what I mean by that is there's a little thing where you can say not interested. So if you see images that, let's be honest, you're probably very interested, but you shouldn't be looking at it, you can hit not interested. There's ways where you can clean your feed, all right? And can I just say this too? Kenny was just up here and was talking about small groups. If you're wrestling with things, guys, you are so easily picked off by the enemy when you're by yourself. You need to be a part of a group. You need to have a group of people around you that love you and that you can talk to about stuff. We weren't meant to do this life alone. So next week when we have our groups launch, I really encourage you to sign up for a group and get connected in spiritual community. Well, let's go on. So when it comes to these appetites, when a good thing starts to become a God thing, meaning it becomes an idol, then it becomes a bad thing. So God created our appetites, but sin is what distorts them. The second thing I would say is that appetites are never fully satisfied. Here's an example. Last Christmas, you stuffed your face, right? And you were like, there's no way I can eat anything else. Like, I'm totally stuffed. And what are you doing 2 hours later? You're back in the kitchen looking for, I don't know, pumpkin pie, pecan pie, whatever it is that's your thing, and you're going back there and you're eating more. Because that's the word that our appetite knows, more. That's what it says. And listen, this applies to anything. No matter how successful you are, you want to be more successful. It doesn't matter how much money you have, you want to have more money. That's the way our appetites are. And then finally with this, I would say that your appetite It always whispers now, never later. It's always now, never later. Perfect example of this would be a newborn baby. Anybody who's had a newborn baby knows this, that this newborn is not saying, mom's really tired right now, so I'm just gonna say I'm hungry later. No, they will scream, right? So it's really not so much that our appetites whisper. Sometimes they scream, they yell, now. And it's the same, guys, with lust. Because lust at its core, it's a temptation to shortcut God to fulfill an appetite that only He can satisfy. And lust takes something that's good and pulls it out of God's intention to use for our own selfish desire. Now, Paul encourages us with this next passage, 2 Timothy 2:22, to run from lust and run towards love. Let's read what he says. He says, run from anything that stimulates sinful lust, but follow anything that makes you want to do right. Pursue faith and love and peace, and enjoy the companionship of those who call on the Lord with pure hearts. Paul's saying we've got to run from that stuff and run instead towards love. So what would be examples of that? Listen, if you find yourself choosing what clothes to wear based upon someone who's not your spouse and what they might say, that's a warning sign. Run from that. Are you making unwise decisions in how you talk with the opposite sex? Stop. Pursue faith. Pursue love. Pursue those things. Well, what about those of us who are single? I've kind of been picking on the married folks. What about being single? Well, the modern dating scene kind of looks like this. Guy meets girl or girl swipes right on an app. They get together. They have a meal together. They end up at someone's house. They look at each other. Things happen. And eventually the guy says, why don't you just stay over? And this happens again and again until this guy meets another girl. And the process is repeated till finally the guy meets that special girl or that girl meets that special guy. And they decide, you know what? You're the one, and they get married. And then years later, they separate and divorce, and everyone wonders what happened. You know what's fascinating to me is how we as a people understand that we have to pay a price now to reap a benefit later, and we do this with everything but relationships. Like when it comes to money and saving up for retirement, we know it kind of stinks to take a little bit of money out of our paycheck to save for later, but we do that because we know eventually, hopefully, we'll be able to retire, right? Or we know that going to school and getting an education, like it doesn't, it's not fun to get up early and go to class or to work a job while going to school, but we know that if we push through, we'll get an education that will hopefully someday be able to be a resource for us for 40 years plus as we have a career. But then when it comes to relationships, it's like we're just brain dead because we do it complete opposite. We think, well, we've got a whole life ahead and someday we'll settle down, but let's just have fun now. And it's almost like with relationships, we try to play the lottery. It's instead of putting in the hard work, let's just do that instead. And here's what happens. People get themselves into really, really tough places because they've chosen to use pleasure as their guide for all their decisions. And can I tell you this? Pleasure has never made a good compass. It just doesn't make a good compass. And XXX never marks the spot. It just doesn't. If we follow our heart, remember what I said before, Jeremiah 19, if we use this as our compass, that is going to lead to death, and that means death of relationships, marriages, friendships. So, hey, Paul knew that the early church was struggling with these same issues, singles and marrieds, and so he has a whole chapter. If you want to dive deep after this message, I would encourage you to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. It's an entire chapter about this, but let's read what Paul says here. He says, now about the questions you asked about in your letter. Yes, it is good to live a celibate life, but because there is so much sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman should have her own husband. The husband should not deprive his wife of sexual intimacy, which is her right as a married woman, nor should the wife deprive her husband? The wife gives authority over her body to her husband, and the husband also gives authority over his body to his wife. So do not deprive each other of sexual relations. The only exception to this rule would be the agreement of both the husband and wife to refrain from sexual intimacy for a limited time so that they can give themselves more completely to prayer. And afterward, they should come together again so that Satan won't be able to tempt them because of their lack of self-control. So Paul's saying it's good to be married. And if you're married, you should be sexually active. Let me stepping on some toes here, right? So first, let's talk about the singles. If you're not married, when I do like premarital counseling, if a couple is looking to get married and I'm going to officiate their wedding, I stress over and over the importance of waiting for marriage. Can we just talk about that real quick? If a couple is engaging in sexual relations before they're married, it's kind of like if you have pain of some kind in your body and you just take ibuprofen, you can mask the symptoms for something that's kind of more serious. And I feel like couples do that with this. They kind of self-medicate. If they have trouble in their relationship, it's easy to go to what feels good and brings some kind of intimacy and closeness. But if a couple has not worked through those things and not learned how to fight or talk or communicate, and they just go to this, eventually that won't work anymore. Just putting aside even what God says not to do it because he says so, there are reasons why it's beneficial to wait. And on the flip side, I tell them, I'm like, the moment you're married, I'm encouraging you, we just say, be like rabbits, okay? Be together often. And you know what's crazy, guys? It's funny. When I see it in my news feed from time to time, I'll send it to my wife, and she just rolls her eyes. But there's like scientific proof and studies shown that active sex life in marriage actually prolongs your life. You know, everybody's looking for the magic pill, or something to make you live a long time. There's science that backs it up. Paul is saying, do not deprive each other. It's not your body. It's marriage, all right? So he goes on, verse 6. He says, this is only my suggestion. It's not meant to be an absolute rule. I wish everyone could get along without marrying just as I do, because Paul was single. But we are not all the same. God gives some the gift of marriage and to others the gift of singleness. So now I say to those who are married and to widows, it's better to stay unmarried just as I am, but if they cannot control themselves, they should go ahead and marry because it is better to marry than to burn with lust. If you're in a relationship and you're struggling with this, Paul's saying it's better to marry than to burn with lust. Guys, we got to be careful who we share DNA with. It shouldn't be just hookups and casual relationships. It should be through love and an intimacy with our Father and with a spouse. Because marriage is the pathway for that God-given natural desires and appetites he's given us. It belongs in marriage. And sexuality, marriage, relationships, all these things were created by God. And God knows the damage that can come when that's taken out of its context. I would liken sexuality like a fireplace. Man, a fire pit or a fireplace is awesome because you can gather around it. You can warm yourself by the fire. It's awesome. You can cook on it. It's awesome. But man, take that fire out of that context and it can kill. It can burn. It can destroy. And sexuality is just like that. And with that said, let's just speak a minute as we close here about the damage or the results that lust can have an impact. This is really why I've been so kind of like reverent walking into this, because I know just statistics that 1 in 3 women, by the time they're 18, have been sexually abused. And it's 1 in 7 guys. So just looking at statistics, I know that means there are many of us in this room that have been impacted by that. So listen, if you're abused, I want you to know that your purity cannot be taken, only given. And I say that because the enemy can work on you to a point where you may think, I'm damaged goods, I'm this, I'm that, all these kind of negative things. When someone tried to take something from you, but can I tell you, your purity is intact. That's something you give. And listen, those of us that are Christians, those of us that follow Jesus, we need to stop making what someone did to us bigger than what Jesus did for us. Let that sink in. There's all kinds of things that have been done to us, but none of those are greater than what Jesus has done for us. So if you feel broken, if you feel dirty, if you feel used, if you feel those things, and that's impacted your marriage, I want to tell you, man, you can be free of that because of what Jesus did. And no matter what happened to you, what Jesus did for you is greater. Is greater. And I will close with this. Everyone looking at porn, everyone finishing a bottle after bottle of wine, and everyone longing for more followers or likes, all of us are really longing and looking for Jesus. We're looking for Jesus. There is a God-shaped hole in every single one of us that only can be filled by Jesus. And so that's why I speak Jesus. When it comes to this topic, when it comes to lust in particular, when it comes to addictions, when it comes to abuse and all these things, I speak Jesus because at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow, every tongue confess Jesus is Lord. But beyond that, He's the healer. He's the one that can refresh us and renew us, cleanse us, and make us new. He can take all the decisions we've made, and by His work on the cross, we can be forgiven. We can have new hope. Your marriage, if it's on the rocks, with Jesus stepping in, there's hope. With addictions in this room, if Jesus steps in, there's hope. And so as we close the service today, our team is going to sing a new song called I Speak Jesus. It's a new song, but I would encourage you guys to stand as we sing this together.